Okay, well, so excited to rejoin a discussion with Craig and Dennis from Deaf Crocodile. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we've been y'all's were the first. Y'all said yes to us first, and so thank you for that again. Gave us some confidence that we could actually go out to the community of people that are producing Blu-rays and ask for time. So thank you for that. And I've been meaning to reach back out. Zach and I have become a big fan of y'all's label, but kind of the timing of this was this Kickstarter that y'all kicked off, I guess, so to speak. And so, first of all, congratulations! It funded in 3 days. Is that right? 4 days?
A little under 4 days, yeah.
Under 4 days.
Yeah, we were really lucky. I'd say Craig really took the lead on the Kickstarter campaign and did a phenomenal job. And I think also because turns out there were a lot of people out there waiting a long time to see Solomon King restored.
And I should say that we reached our funding goal, and as I put it in the update in the Kickstarter, we reached our first goal, because Kickstarter being an all or nothing venture, I set the bar as low as I thought was reasonable, but we could definitely use more than that than that level to even get to the break-even point on Solomon King. So keep pledging.
Well, that's a perfect tie-in. So I mean, this is kind of, you said something interesting that I wanted to kind of dig into. So you mentioned in the blurb about this I guess finding this film and deciding to go put it out, that it's coming out either way. However, this gives y'all some extra money that you've already kind of invested into the project, and you phrase it in such a way of like, don't worry about, I know there's some Kickstarters that don't make it, or you don't know where the money goes, but like this is all going basically to recoup some of the costs that y'all put in.
There's a lot of projects where they set a goal and they reach the goal, but that goal wasn't enough for them to actually produce the product that they were promising, and so then people never get anything. That's not what this is. We're almost done. We've got dates set for release, and it's happening. Even if we hadn't launched this Kickstarter, the Kickstarter was just a way to try and recoup all of the upfront expenses that it cost us to do it, because we were determined this had to be released. Like, it's too important, it's too amazing, there's too much of a story behind the movie.
Yeah,
it should be told. So we're like, this is happening. So I thought, well, a Kickstarter would be a good way to try and help us recoup everything we've already put into it.
well, that's exactly kind of where I was going. So the stretch goal is 25,000. I checked this morning, and I think y'all had reached like 17, or it's kind of getting close on 18 already. So obviously, by the time this is coming out on the 15th of August, so you're going to have 2 weeks left in the month. We're recording on the 7th. So as of the 7th, it's at about somewhere between 17 to 18,000. But I hope that this reaches 100,000. And I hope anybody that's listening doesn't stop giving, because this is kind of what I wanted to chat with y'all about today. It's not like you and Dennis are just sitting there like Scrooge McDuck swinging through piles of gold from Deaf Crocodile, right? Like, this money is directly tied into finding future Solomon Kings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I thought it would be a good tie-in, because I think if I look across, Unknown Man of Shandagor, Delta Space Mission, Ilya Muromets, the Shah Ramokri films, and Sampo, those are the releases so far. And plus you have, I know, more planned theatrically. Can you talk a little bit about, because I know at least 1 or 2 of those are already kind of lost films that would not have come out without y'all's work, right?
Well, Unknown Man of Shandagor was extremely obscure. I think it had a very brief release here in the US, possibly for like 2 minutes back in the late 60s, and then disappeared. And I read about it in a film encyclopedia many years ago, and it just kind of stuck in the back of my brain. I have a list that I kind of keep there of films that I would love to track down. I think this is from my days as a programmer with the American Cinematheque here, because I could be really patient. There were times when it would take me 5-10 years to find a print of a particular movie. And in those cases, I would spend all that time. We would fly in this incredibly rare print. We would screen it usually one time, and then we would ship it back to wherever it had come from.
Wow.
And eventually I got to thinking, hey, that's a lot of work for relative. I mean, it was, it would be a beautiful event and people would get to see this gorgeous 35 millimeter print on the big screen, but then it would disappear back into a vault or an archive, in some cases, like never to be seen again. So in the case of Unknown Man of Shandigor, we were really fortunate that we got in touch with the family of the filmmaker Jean-Louis Roy, who sadly passed away just recently before we had reached out to his family. But his sons Michael and Christian Roy were incredibly friendly and supportive in working with us, licensing us the rights to the film, and then put us in touch with the Cinémathèque Suisse, who had done a 4K scan from the original 35 millimeter camera negative,
Okay.
and transferred the audio elements. And then Craig was able to work his restoration wizardry to really kind of up it a couple more notches so that it looks absolutely stunning. And I have to say, we've both worked on a bunch of restoration and new releases together now, including Belladonna of Sadness and Funeral of Roses and Private Property. And I think Unknown Man of Shandigor maybe the film that we were sort of most astonished by the finished product, like just how gorgeous the cinematography and the visuals are in the film. I think it really blew us both away. The black and white cinematography by Roger Bimpage and Jean-Louis Roy's sense of framing and staging is just
some of the shots and the compositions, and it's even in that old trailer that was included on the disc, they refer to it as a comic book, and there are definitely shots and layouts that really do kind of lend that kind of feel of a comic book feel to it, visually. And then on top of that layer is just an incredibly gorgeous black and white cinematography. And then the spy movie, and then the spoof of a spy movie. It's just got like all these layers it's all there. But none of it is like in your face. It's all kind of subtle, other than the visuals. The visuals are just stunning.
That's gotta be an exciting moment, right? Because you're just sitting there restoring it, and all of a sudden it's almost like you're uncovering this. It's almost like an Indiana Jones type moment or something, right? Where it's like your work is
I keep saying whenever we talk about this particular film, is that Dennis had told me about it, and he was very just kind of, there's this Swiss film, you should check it out. And so he gave me a link, and I watched it, and I like immediately called him, and I was like, "This is incredible!" I'm like you did not sell this.
I didn't want to oversell it too much.
I fell in love with it immediately. I was like, "This is incredible."
Yeah. Well, and Delta Space Mission, which was the second Blu-ray that we put out, is another, film that was very hard to find, very obscure, certainly over here in North America. And we were really lucky that after, it actually took about 5 years all in of reaching out, and then we started communication, and then it would kind of fall into limbo, and we try and start it up again with the CNC, the Romanian Film Center, and the Romanian Film Archive. And eventually, we were able to get in touch with the right people, and they were incredibly cooperative, and they had done a new 4K scan recently off of the camera negative. And again, Craig was able to work his wizardry on that. As part of that, one of the best things is that we got to become really good friends with one of the two co-directors, Călin Kazan, who lives in Bucharest, Romania, and is just amazing, so sweet, incredible animator and director. His co-director, Mircea Toia, died in the 1990s a while ago, but Călin has been able to advise us and talk with us. And early next year, we're going to be releasing the second film that they did together, which is another insane animated mid 80s sci-fi epic, which is even more freakadelic and far out than Delta
Anyone who
Space
likes
Mission.
Delta
Even
Space
more
Mission-
obscure.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
think
more off the radar.
Wow.
anybody that liked Delta Space Mission, I think they're gonna like this second one even more.
Yeah, I think if you go on IMDb, it doesn't even list this second feature.
No
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah, they only did two, unfortunately. And then there was a regime change at Anima Film, which was the main Romanian animation producer at the time, and they weren't able to continue. They actually they kind of skirted the rules to get both of these features made. They produced them under the guide. They weren't able to make features, but they could make short films. So
Okay.
they just made a series of short films that were always meant to be
Oh.
connected together as a feature. But they said, oh, no, we're just doing these little 7-8 minute shorts. So
Interesting.
both Delta Space Mission and the sort of semi-sequel, it's not a direct sequel, doesn't involve the same characters, but they're both sci-fi animated. In this case, the second film is this amazing mashup of The Empire Strikes Back, Tarzan, and Alien.
Sold.
And you can see when you watch it, you will immediately see big chunks of Empire and Dagobah and Luke
Wow.
Skywalker like characters, but then you'll also see crazy elements from early 1980s Japanese animated TV, and it's just this incredible kind of space prog Eastern European synth score. And it's that fusion, we've talked about that before. It's looking at kind of popular Western narratives, but then interpreted through the lens of a different culture. So one of my favorite filmmakers is Jean-Pierre Melville, the great French crime director of the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, who did Bob the Flambeau and Le Samurai and many others. And he loved classic American noir.
Yeah.
But he filtered it through a very French sensibility. And in the same way, when you watch these two films by Kalin and Murchatoya, you're seeing elements of popular mainstream Western sci-fi, but filtered through a behind the Iron Curtain early 80s Romanian sensibility. And it's that fusion of the two that, for me, results in something incredibly strange and wonderful.
Well,
I always find that
good.
someone from another country looking at someone else's country, it's always more interesting because they see it differently.
Yeah.
They notice that you're going to notice the things that a native takes for granted, but is interesting to them. So it's always it's even as simple as cinematography. Like whoever's doing the cinematography, like getting someone who's not from that country. I like they just see things slightly differently, and it makes it more interesting.
It's funny. I just finished going through all of Wong Kar-wai's films, and the second to last one he made was called My Blueberry Nights. Have either one of y'all seen that?
That's one of Wong Kar-wai's I've never seen.
Yeah, it got kind of ragged on when it first came out, and I think people were expecting it to be a rom-com. So it's like this kind of American rom-com as told through the eyes of Wong Kar-wai, who's obviously that's not his style, and he was trying to reflect on his kind of version of Americana. And I think it's a bit awkward at first. And so I think there's times like that where maybe it's not done as well, but it certainly has an intrigue because it's like almost like an alien perspective on Americana, so there's certainly elements of interest to it. But then in what you're talking about with like Melville, or whether it's some of this like the Colleen movies or whatever, it's fast because when they're almost like pulling elements of this culture that's coming from the States and making it their own. And I love it. That's one of my favorite things about the French New Wave in general, I think.
Well, Shahram Mokri's Iranian films are another great example, like Fish and Cat, which is his amazing 2.5-hour single shot essay on American kind of slasher classic horror films of the 70s, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th,
Yeah.
but filtered through an incredibly beautiful and minimalist Iranian art house lens. And Sharam loves genre filmmaking, but he's like, I can't do that. What I can do is my version of it. It's would you guys like to hear a Werner Herzog story?
Always.
Okay. All right. So years ago, I wrote and co-produced an anthology horror film called Trapped Ashes that eventually came out with episodes by Joe Dante and Monty Hellman and Sean Cunningham and Ken Russell. So I was trying to get Werner to direct one of the episodes that was going to shoot in Japan, and I knew him from my job at the Cinematheque. And I sent him the script, and he asked if we could have coffee in Hollywood at the corner of Highland and Franklin, his little strip mall next to a sushi place and like a supermarket, and there's a Starbucks. So we sit down, and he says, "Dennis, I have read your script, and it is a very good script. For a horror film, it is the kind of horror film that the audience will like, but it is not the horror film that I would make. If I were going to make a horror film, it would be about a little boy, and he has a little red ball. He loves this red ball more than anything in the world. It is his closest friend, his prized possession. It is his universe. And he is bouncing this ball all day long. And one day, it goes up, and it gets stuck in a tree, and the ball will not come down. And the little boy is below. He's crying. He's saying, 'Ball, come down to me.' And the ball will not come down. Do you see the horror in this?" And as he's telling it to me, I'm like, yes, this is the most incredible horror film I've ever heard, and I want to make your
Right.
I wish Klaus Kinski could have just played the little boy, and it would be perfect.
or the red ball or the
Or the
tree,
ball.
Oh, yeah, just-
or all three of them. And I was so captivated. I was like, Werner, yes, let's make your horror film about the little boy and the red ball and the tree. So we didn't get to work with him, but I did get this amazing explanation of what Werner's idea of horror. And of course, he did make a beautiful adaptation of Nosferatu,
Yeah, exactly.
with Klaus Kinski and Isabella Gianni, which is amazing. But clearly, as with Sharam, they love these genre tropes, but they have to kind of do it their own way, which is why I sort of say, like Sharam's films, Fishing Cat is a horror film the way that Tarkovsky's Stalker is a science fiction film.
Mhm.
Absolutely, Stalker is a science fiction film, one of the greatest ever made, but if you watch it expecting a typical sci-fi film, you're going to be pretty mystified.
Yeah.
that was when I watched Fish and Cat. I guess it's been about 2 or 3 weeks now. Whenever it came out, I didn't even really notice it was one shot till like halfway through. I don't know why, it just finally clicked with me, and I was like, for once, it's a one shot film that I don't feel is masturbatory in the sense, because it's not. He does. I don't know. I liked how much he didn't draw attention to a lot of those like gimmicky. I hate to use the word gimmicky, but in a way, gimmicky elements. Like, usually in a slasher film, if I'm watching like a bad Friday 13th film, I'm looking for the kills, and there's not a on-scene kill in the film, and you're still like enamored with it. And I just think that's really cool.
He loves playing with the concept of time, and if you put a cut in there, it's like you've got a Mobius strip. Well, if you cut it, it's no longer a Mobius strip. Like you can't put a cut in there.
That's a cool idea. That's a cool explanation of it.
And it's just neat that everything is like, you still get flashbacks and flash forwards and different perspectives within that one shot. And I think that's just
within the same timeline. Yeah. He's the only that you could show the past, the present, and the future without ever cutting or dissolving. It's genius.
Yeah. Really.
It really is. When I saw the first of his films we saw was Careless Crime, which won the Best Screenplay Award at Venice in 2020. And Craig and I were both so blown away. Craig had a great description. It's like you're playing chess on 3 levels on a glass board. And if you look at it from the side, you can see 3 separate games. But if you look at it from above, it looks like all of the pieces are on the board at the same time.
Oh,
That's Careless Crime. The events of the late 70s and the tragedy of the Cinema Rex fire, which is one of the worst acts of terrorism ever. Right. And the events of the present all seem to be happening in the same time space. And that is so mind-blowing. And literally afterwards, we were like, did he make any other films? And then it's the only filmmaker. We were like, all right, we got to corner the market. And
that's literally what happened. We saw Careless Crime, and we immediately were like, what else has he done? And then we saw the list, and we contacted them, and we're like, we want all of his films.
Just everything, please.
And it's the only multi-film box set that we've attempted so far. And I think it's because we realized none of his films had come out in the US on home video or digital to date. And we realized, like, if we don't do it, and if we don't do it right and put them all together, because I think people really should have a chance to see Fishing Cat and Invasion and Careless Crime and Ashcan, and realize what a really wonderful and significant director Sharam is. Like, they may not get released here. So we were like, okay, we have to license and put them all in a box set.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but just in case you know this story, because y'all are both pretty good at stories. Kiarostami, at the end of the film, is it 24 frames? Is that right? Where he just lists the name Shafram Makri.
Yeah.
Do y'all know anything behind that by chance? Have you ever heard anything about what happened?
I don't personally, but I'm sure Sharam does. And I know that they were friends. And the way I interpreted it is that it was Kiarostami's homage, or basically saying this is where the future direction.
Yeah. That's almost like a passing of the baton, right?
Yeah, or a little sign with an arrow that points, okay, this way, Sharam this way. So
it's a hell of a tribute.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, as a young director, imagine seeing that. Doesn't get much better than that. I know there's recent news about Kiarostami, but even that, just from a filmmaking perspective and from a reputation perspective, that's a young filmmaker. You can't do much better than that. Okay, so this is my point, that y'all are doing such a good job of this overall perspective that I have on Deaf Crocodile, which obviously is an extension of your personalities. And I'm just curious, I want to explain how I view Deaf Crocodile and just have you all react to it and see if you agree, and just kind of, my perception so far, speaking with y'all over a year ago and then now seeing what you've actually released on home video, is that you're using this as almost like, you both have these individual, very tenured experience in film, whether it's on the programming side or on the restoration side or technical side or just across the board. And you have so many, you have this opportunity through Deaf Crocodile to take all these individual kind of stories and lost films. Like Dennis, you said you have this list in your head, and Craig, I'm sure you have your own version of this. Like, you have an opportunity to sort of use this as like a playground and an opportunity to help the world see these films that need to be seen for one way or the other, whether they're lost or whether they're just cool films that are obscure in North America. And it's truly a global company, like Switzerland, Romania, I guess USSR, but really Ukraine, right? That's what Ilya is. The whole story is about Kiev, right?
Well, so Ilya Muromets was produced, during the days of the Soviet Union, USSR, but Ilya Muromets is a legendary hero of the Kievan Rus, which was the precursor to modern day Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. And of course, the irony is that one of the justifications for the horrific invasion of Ukraine recently has been a return to the mythical Rus, which is the Kievan Rus, this concept of a united Mother Russia. And the film was made
with air quotes around it.
Yeah, and when the film was made, most of the action is set in what is now Ukraine and in Kiev, and in the film, it's the invading Tugars who are trying to decimate and conquer the embattled Russians, pre-Ukrainians. But when you watch it now, it's hard not to look at it and say, oh, the Tugars are like Russia, and
Totally.
Ilya and his fellow countrymen are like the embattled Ukrainians. So that clearly was not the intent of the film when it was made, but it is really interesting that a narrative will remain fixed, but our interpretations of it can change radically over the years. And Petrushko, who's one of my favorite filmmakers, was first and foremost a great epic fantasy director. But just because something is a great fantasy doesn't mean it can't have real world political implications.
Sure.
Sampo, which is the second of his two films, is also a fascinating instance of kind of again what we were talking about before, which is the intermingling of two cultures. Sampo is based on the Kalevala, which is one of the great national Finnish epics, and so it's very famous. Even to this day, it's adapted in film, TV, graphic novels. We included several pages from a graphic novel adaptation that was done recently in Finland to show that it's still a narrative that is being reinterpreted in Finnish culture. So this was a co-production between the Soviet Union and Finland. And when you watch it, it's a very Finnish film, but much of it was shot on sound stages in the Soviet Union by one of the Soviet Union's, sort of greatest fantasy filmmakers. So again, it is this really fascinating intermingling of cultural narratives.
Yeah.
I love Sampo. Sampo is one of my favorite films, also been one of the hardest Petrushko films to see in its proper form for many years. We were really lucky in the case of, so for Ilya Muromets, we worked with Mosfilm, which is the largest, longest running studio and archive of films in Russia. For Sampo, we worked with Kavi, which is the National Audiovisual Institute of Finland, and they had done a 4K scan and restoration from the original camera negative of the Finnish version of the film. So it was shot in 4 different versions. There was a CinemaScope Finnish version and a 1:3:7:1 flat version.
Okay.
And then it was also shot a Russian language CinemaScope and flat. And ironically, the version that most people know here, which is As the Day the Earth Froze, they licensed, from what I understand, the flat Russian version, right? And that's the one that was cut up and redubbed as The Day the Earth Froze. So all those what appeared to be pan and scan actually were, it was the 1:3:7, so you weren't seeing that gorgeous CinemaScope frame and vistas. And I have to say, it's really breathtaking. When we got the 4K files for the first time and Craig posted a private link for me, I was just like blown away.
Well,
how beautiful it is.
Both films are beautiful.
People talk about what's the English name? The Sword and the Dragon, right? Being on Mystery Science Theater or whatever, I didn't actually know that. I was reading up about that. But, I think if you, just that opening shot of Ilya Muromets alone, where you see this giant walking on screen and like I guess the travelers, the minstrels kind of there in the mountain, the way he played with perspective and the way he, unbelievable, right? And the color kind of palette that he used, like it was like a matte painting almost in the background, and then that perspective was so beautiful. I was thinking, like, yeah, I mean, there's a few goofy moments in the movie, like when they keep calling him a young man, when he's he's obviously not like a super young man. Like there's some silliness there, but like there was nothing in that movie that I felt like I don't think that would have ever made it to Mystery Science Theater, is my point, if they had seen that version of it, as opposed to the highly cut up, anglicized version that was kind of being circulated, right? So seeing it in the pure form is so important, I guess, or the way that it was originally made.
Well, and we were really lucky that Mike Nelson agreed to do an hour-long interview with us through a connection of Bob Fingerman, who is a wonderful comics artist and graphic novelist, knows Mike, who was the head writer, and he was the lead actor on Mystery Science Theater 3000 for a number of years. And so we did a Zoom Q&A with him during the pandemic about his career, and then talking about The Day the Earth Froze and The Sword and the Dragon Mystery Science Theater episodes, which I have to say, I think are brilliant. They're incredibly funny. And I love watching them. And as much as I love the original films, I can also watch those and laugh my butt off. Interestingly, somebody asked just over the weekend, in response to a post about Sampo, if the dubbed cut up versions of both films were ever going to be released on Blu-ray. And I hope so. I think that's a bridge. That's a bridge too far for us. It's a major undertaking to get Ilya Muromets, which I have to say, we were in discussions with Moss Film and had licensed the film long before the war broke out in Ukraine, and they had sent us the materials and everything.
Okay.
And we actually had a discussion internally about whether we should wait. And our partners with Seagull Films were also very adamant that we should move ahead with the release of the film now, that this was, a work of fantasy, a work of art from several generations ago, but it does actually have political implications now. And that ironically, this is actually a very good time to release an epic film about the embattled residents of Kyiv who are struggling against the invading hordes. And I was like, okay, let's see, we'll go ahead with it. So
Yeah. Super interesting.
We had briefly discussed if it was possible, would we want to put the Mystery Science Theater versions as like a bonus on the Blu-ray, and partly for it would probably just be financially not make sense, but we also wanted the proper widescreen, beautiful uncut versions to stand on their own, and you can see the funny stuff somewhere else, but this was to showcase this is what they really are.
We all have had a couple of discussions like that, right? Like I think it was on the Ashkan film where there's a warning ahead of the film that says there's a snippet from 2001 that had to be removed, but you had to engage the filmmakers. You kind of made it a point to say, don't worry, we were working with them. It's not just a decision we made, but
yeah, and that was really minor. Like it's I don't even know why it was in there. He must have just been like, oh, I want to throw a homage to Kubrick in my film, because it doesn't have really any bearing on the plot. It's like 10, 15 seconds. This guy walks in a room and these people are watching 2001, and then he leaves. And we're like, I don't think we can do that.
well, we asked Sharam first, and then he said, well, you should talk to the producer and distributor in Iran, and so we sent an
Didn't
email
get
saying,
clearance.
"Hey, did you guys actually license that footage from 2001?" And they were like, "No way, no, we just put it in there." And we said, "Okay, well, you know, we could do one of two things. We can try for years to get permission from the Kubrick estate and Warner Brothers to include it. And even if they agreed, the licensing for, a 20 or 30-second clip of the film would be so outrageous, I'm sure. Or with your permission, we can cut it out." And Sharam said, "It's more important, I think, that people see the entire film." And if, so with his permission, we snipped that very short scene out. So I hate to do that. I mean, honestly, that kind of is a little knife in the gut for me as a film lover. I'm always trying to put more footage back in or find longer versions. But in this case, it was either like, okay, either we take out that very short scene, which didn't impact the story, or we had to drop Ashcan from the disc. Like that was like either that little scene goes or the entire film would have to be left
It
off.
reminds me of the very, and again, that's his first film. And I think that's more common with first-time filmmakers, is they don't really think about licensing issues with music or clips from other movies. And one of the first films I ever worked on restoration work on was a 1960s surfing film. And I'm working on it, and I don't usually do much with audio. I'm mostly handling picture restoration. And so I'm working on this, and I was looking for some reference. I wanted to, typically if I'm working on something, I want to see the film itself in total, just to get a kind of sense of the film. And so I'm watching it, and he cuts to this scene of the, people just driving in their like VW van down along the beach shoreline, and Strawberry Fields Forever is playing.
Okay.
And so I emailed him. I was like, "Greg, do you realize you've got Beatles music in that movie, right?" And he's like, "I do." He's like, "Oh, that's not going to work."
The music is the killer. I think it was one of the reasons why Two Lane Blacktop, one of my favorite films by one of my favorite directors, was unseen for many years. It's because the music had not been cleared for a home video release. So,
well, I mean, not to go too far in this, but I remember I've been collecting DVDs for a while now, and the first season of Beavis and Butthead had to be taken off the shelves initially because of music clearance. And then there was another big one. Oh, The Wonder Years. That wasn't released for years because they couldn't get the rights figured out for the music, right? But
there was
I think WKRP. Weren't there big because they used a lot of contemporary music. And then I think when they, if I'm not mistaken, somebody may correct me on this, but I think they had to like pull the original tracks and substitute other music, or they just couldn't release those episodes at all because it had so much music that was never licensed for home video use.
Yeah, I guess because a lot of times even if they do license it, they're not thinking way in the future.
Right.
So, all right. Well, and so they get the license in the most affordable way possible. It's like, all right, we've got it licensed for theatrical. And if it was something older, it was before there was like a whole home video thing. So it's like, oh, you didn't license it for all that.
It's a different tier kind of.
Yeah.
But this is like, so this is kind of all tied into one of the big questions I guess I have for you all though. So so you mentioned some stats that are just staggering to me from a persistence standpoint, right? So you've said this film took 5 years, this film could take 5 to 7 years. So how does that work as y'all are trying to put together a physical media company, right? Because I mean, like, so you have, I'm sure you're going to have another release planned in between now and, sorry, I'm just drawing a blank, Solomon King, if that's coming out later in the year, right? So are there any more projects, and I don't know how much you can talk about openly, but are there any more projects you have coming up where you had to be building this up for, 2, 3, 5 years?
No, after Solomon King, it's going to be 5 years before the next one.
That's how you do it.
No. Funny enough, we are in a very unusual position for us. In that we actually have a backlog of films that
We're in a bit of a log jam.
licensed.
You know, I
And-
can only restore so fast.
Yeah, and in fact, because Solomon King has required so much of Craig's time and our colorist Tyler Fagerstrom to get it looking as good as it can, we were hoping to put out the sort of semi-sequel to Delta Space Mission in October, and Craig is like, I'm not going to put something out that isn't up to his incredibly high standards, thank God. So we're pushing that to early 2023 so that he'll have more time to work on it after Solomon King is finished. But Solomon King, it was a truly lost film in the sense that for the last 45 years or so, all that anyone could see of it was like a 30 to 60 second TV ad that had been posted on YouTube. And I came across a copy of the soundtrack album a couple of years ago at Record Surplus here in LA, which is one of my favorite vintage record stores at Santa Monica and Centinela. Encourage everybody to go there if you're in LA and keep them in business.
I should go more
I listened to it.
down the street from me.
I listened to it and it's amazing. All these incredible, it's from that early 70s sort of Curtis Mayfield Shaft era of kind of really beautiful driving soul funk. So I fell in love with the album, and it was all artists that I'd never heard of before. And so I said, well, I'd like to watch the film. And I started digging around for it, and all the references were like lost film, hasn't been seen in 40 years, lost film. And so I said, well, this is kind of naive, but what we do is find lost film. So I talked to Craig and I said, hey, let's find this one.
All you had to do, he sent me the link. There was a YouTube link where you could hear the theme music. And I was like, oh yeah. I was like, I don't even know what the movie is, but if that's the theme music, we need to find this.
There's a project there. Okay.
So we started trying to find, well, first Sal Watts to see if he was still alive. And as it turns out, he sadly passed away in 2003. So we found an obituary that for a Sal Watts, but it didn't list any of his incredible work in media. So Sal had 2 record labels. He wrote, co-directed, produced, and starred in Solomon King. He executive produced a local Oakland dance and music program called Soul Is / The Jay Payton Show, which is an incredible showcase for local dance troupes as well as local musicians. He owned restaurants. He had a string of incredible fashion stores, Mr. Sal's Fashions. And so many of the clothes in Solomon King were direct from his store, but didn't mention any of that apart from Mr. Sal's Fashions. So we didn't even know that was the Sal Watts we were looking for.
Yeah, you did an incredible, like you could be a detective, Dennis, because it wasn't, in fact, the obituary wasn't Sal Watts. It was Selma Watts.
Selma. Yeah, Selma, which was his given.
That's his real name.
Yeah, Selma.
You still figured it out.
we kept hitting dead ends, and then we were finally able to connect with his wife, his widow, Belinda Burton Watts, and that's when things really took off because she manages his estate and is the rights holder for Solomon King, which Sal produced. And she had what she thought was the camera negative in her closet for 20, 25 years since a lab called CFI had closed down in LA. And it turned out to be the 35 millimeter soundtrack elements only, which is good to have. So the film will have great sound, but it sent us back to square one in terms of you can't restore a film with just the soundtrack.
Yeah.
So we reached out to archives all across the US, private collectors, people who are in that world. And I think a couple of them had the same trailer. They're like, yeah, I have a trailer for Solomon King. I've never seen a print. And then UCLA Film and TV Archive came back to us and said, yeah, we have an original release print complete, but it's badly faded. It's like purple pink. And so they were very generous in giving us access to the film. We did a 10-second scan test and gave it to Craig and our colorist Tyler, and then they came back, and the change was just miraculous.
Okay.
And that's what really convinced us that we were going to be able to restore, close to 95% of the original color from this faded purple pink print. As far as we know, the original negative was lost years ago. And the film will now be saved. God willing, it'll never disappear again. Belinda was good enough to put her soundtrack elements on deposit with UCLA, so they're now stored with the print. And when we're finished with the digital restoration, we're going to put a copy of that on deposit with UCLA. So they will have all of those materials in one place. So it'll never go away again. So to go back to what you said earlier about the Kickstarter, like we were determined, like we made the commitment a long time ago. The train had left the station that come hell or high water, we were going to restore and preserve Solomon King, because if we didn't do it now, it might truly be lost forever. So we had already said, even if we go really far into the hole on this film, to preserve that moment in Oakland Black music, fashion, film, culture, even the architecture. A lot of the film was shot either in Sal and Belinda's home or in businesses that he owned, restaurants he owned, places that are now long gone. Oakland has changed so radically since Solomon King was shot there. So just as a picture of this long gone moment in Oakland Black culture, we were like, we got to preserve this movie. So that was a big thing for us. And I know that it may not sound like the smartest financial decision, but we are hoping that the film will do well. We'll certainly make money for Belinda and her family and the estate, and for us, we're hoping that we can license it. There's been interest from distributors overseas, and that Sal's work will finally get the attention it deserves, because we were really determined to tell his and Belinda's story, and the fact that she's here to speak for the two of them. They have an incredible life history, both of them.
Yeah, we honestly were hoping that the exposure that this restoration and release brings to not only the film but Sal's story. Really hope a documentary filmmaker is as fascinated as we are, because Sal's story deserves a feature documentary on its own.
That's awesome.
So to bring it back to the Kickstarter for just a second. So I was curious about this because with y'all's newest update, it's regarding getting everyone a copy of the soundtrack, and so you can hear it. I think, make sure I have this right. So once you reach the $25,000, it'll be included with every backer. So I guess my question there is, when you have this idea of what's going to be a reward tier and what is kind of, I guess in this case, it's a little bit of a carrot to try to get to those stretch goals and everything else. What gives you that? Like, what makes you decide on which way you go with that, instead going that direction rather than say, oh, well, we'll include a CD or we'll include an MP4 copy or something like that for that amount?
You mean for the soundtrack or the feature?
It was the newest one's the soundtrack, right? That's what the stretch
Right.
goal's for. Yeah.
Yeah, we're hoping, because one of the ththings is that the stretch goal, it has to be like, you can't add like a new product. Like if you reach this amount, then we'll add, like you can buy, that would have to be like its own new Kickstarter.
Okay.
I figured like an MP3 download of the soundtrack would be, you know, that would be able to, when we raise the extra money, that'll give us the money we need to digitize it, to remaster it. And then we'll have MP3s available, and we'll also have a master that hopefully maybe we can do something bigger with later.
Okay, cool.
But that would have to be a different Kickstarter because it's a different product.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. I was just curious if there was like a logistical reason to decide whether something should be a reward or something should be a stretch goal. So that makes sense.
Yeah, it's gonna take another fairly significant chunk of money to digitize the materials, clean them up, and prepare the audio. So we have the 35 millimeter OST, the soundtrack elements, but those have dialogue and sound effects mixed in. As far as we know, the original master tapes for the soundtrack seem to be lost, like the camera negative. It was recorded at a studio here in Los Angeles. That studio no longer exists under that name, but I think the building is there, and the family of one of the men that ran the studio sort of transformed it into a nonprofit music institute. I'm not sure if they're actually still open or not. We did reach out to them about 6 months ago and asked, hey, is there any chance you have any old tapes lying around in the back room that they say Solomon King on them? And we haven't heard anything. And I think that was sort of wishful thinking that it might still be there nearly almost 50 years later. But as far as we know, the original master tapes for the soundtrack album are probably gone, along with unfortunately the master tapes for several other 45s that Sal had put out on his Salwa label, all of which seem to have some connection to Solomon King. Like the B-side is like action theme from Solomon King. So, I have to say, he was really great at cross promotion. So, he uses all of the clothes from Mr. Sal's Fashions and Solomon King, and then he puts out the soundtrack and related 45s on his own label. We continually sort of say, he should have been Oakland's answer to Berry Gordy. He had that kind of ambition, kind of entrepreneurial drive and talent, and the fact that it all seems to have kind of fallen apart, and unfortunately he wound up doing time in prison in Lompoc in the 80s on tax related charges, which is really sad. And when he got out, apparently he was never able to sort of regain the momentum that he had in the early 70s. And then he suffered a devastating stroke and was in pretty bad shape the last 7 years of his life. He and Belinda had been a couple early on, so they were together at the time Solomon King was made, and she appears in the film. She's at the very end of the movie in the airplane scene, and it's her Maserati that Sal drives in the film.
Oh, wow.
A lot of the beautiful house that Sal is sort of seducing various women in, and when she gets shot in the film, that was their home. But then they split up and reconnected, and then she was able to be there and support him and look after him the last 7 years of his life when he was in really pretty poor condition. And he has a number of children, and so we're just hoping for him, for his extended family, that Restoring Solomon King shines a light on his incredible sort of contributions from the 70s.
You have him running side by side with Rudy Ray Moore, right? Because Dolomite comes out in either 74 or 75, and that one had everything that seems like he wanted. That had the commercial success all of a sudden. I forget the numbers, but it was something like $100,000 budget and made $10 million. The numbers are crazy for Dolomite. So it's just interesting to think about those two kind of running side by side.
Yeah, we had when I was programming at the Cinematheque, we were lucky to have Rudy Ray Moore appear for a screening of Dolomite.
Oh wow!
And we never paid for speakers to appear because, like, what are you going to pay Clint Eastwood to appear, or George Clooney, or Nicole Kidman, or like, you know? But we did pay Rudy Ray Moore. You know, his office was like, yeah, Rudy gets paid. You got to pay him an honorarium. So I think we paid him $500 or $700 to appear, and it was worth every penny.
Yeah, I bet.
He came in and he did that his incredible Dolomite persona live, incredibly X-rated. Stage of the Egyptian theater. I think I might have even said beforehand, you know, if you're easily offended, you shouldn't be here. You should be watching Dolomite. And you certainly shouldn't listen to this Q&A with Rudy Ray Moore. But he was fantastic.
Even the poetry he has in that movie is entertaining. I can't imagine what he'd be like in person. But do y'all have? Can you speak at all to what's coming up next? I don't know how close you are to the vest with some of this stuff, but are you able to speak at all about what we can expect from Deaf Crocodile?
We have, as I said, the sort of semi-sequel to Delta Space Mission from the same directing team of Kalim Kazan and Mircea Toia. This is another incredible sort of freakadelic Romanian animated sci-fi film from the mid-'80s.
At least three or four more countries.
Yes. We have another extremely rare Finnish genre film,
Okay.
which has not been seen in many years and is I would say loosely in the Unknown Man of Shandagor kind of vein that I think people are really going to love. We are releasing an amazing 1960s Japanese movie, incredibly sort of surreal, sleazy film noir that is an amazing film that is a kind of direct connection. It's a companion piece to one of the best known Japanese movies of the late 1960s. We're working on a number of other rare Eastern European genre films that have never been released here on Blu-ray to our knowledge. We got a bunch of stuff.
There's a German animated film I've not given up hope on yet.
There's a
You were talking about how hard it is and how long it takes. This one's been on my list, and I'm like, I want to do this film.
What's the thing that's stopping you, Craig? Is it finding the elements, or what's the hard part about that one?
You know what's interesting is that a lot of these older obscure films, a lot of times they're owned by companies that, you know, they've moved on. They're like, this is 40 years ago. They don't care. They're like, you know, so we're like, they're busy doing other things. So, you know, you send them an email and maybe 4 months later you get an email back, and it's like just back and forth and just years go by, and you're like, yeah, and it's just I'm still hopeful that one will get done. It's just gonna take some time.
Yeah, no, there's literally 4 or 5 films that are now the clock is now into years. It's passed from months into year, and then into years multiple, and every couple of months, I will send a little nudge and say, hey, remember we were talking 5 or 6 months ago and I never heard back? Yeah, we're still really interested. And sometimes it shakes things loose, and God knows why, but suddenly the stars will align and they're like, oh yeah, okay, we'll I think most of the time it's because they're just tired of getting pestering emails from me and Craig. They're like, who are these crazy guys in LA? And if we just license this movie to them, then would then go away.
Some people would ask, is this how you decide or use Kickstarter to fund these projects? And unfortunately, you can't do it that way. You need to sign a license before you can decide you're doing anything.
Oh, yeah.
You can't really have a Kickstarter and say, oh, well, if you raise 10 grand, we're going to do this. So it's like, well, no, you have to have already committed to it. Because that would make things so much easier. Be like, oh, we're going to do a Kickstarter. If it raises 15 grand, then we're like, great, that pays for the scanning, and we're off to the races. But the people licensing it to you they're like, no, that doesn't work that way.
It's
Well,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Just hearing y'all talk, it feels like, if I were to look ahead for, I don't know how far y'all think, 5 to 10 years, and what Def Crocodile kind of grows into, I guess, as you start getting into the dozens of releases, and do you have a vision for that in terms of, are you going to start getting into, lesser known films from well-known directors that may have been lost, or are you going to get into kind of continue to push these voices of underappreciated artists that have been lost through time? Or do you have any sense of, like, if you get to, now that you're getting to run your dream project and run it the way you want to, do you have any sense of what that identity is going to be as you continue to grow and expand?
Well, the vision I have is I'm going to need another big bookshelf in the garage to hold more Blu-rays.
Uh-huh.
I was just telling Zach that I spent a good part of the weekend having to build new shelf space, and then we found a big mid-century shelving unit that's incredibly heavy at the flea market today because the shelf space we built wasn't quite big enough for all the Blu-rays and DVDs. And I was looking at between Def Crocodile and Cinelicious and Arbalos, Craig and I have actually been involved with restoring and releasing quite a few films on physical media, and that's not even all the films. I mean, we distribute theatrically and for digital streaming and educational these wonderful films from India and Southeast Asia.
Amazing
films by Achal Mishra. We just learned, it's amazing, the Museum of Modern Art in New York is doing an incredible film series mid-September through mid-October on emerging voices in independent Indian cinema. And that is actually an area that we have been really interested in and doing a lot of work in, trying to acquire these films and make them available. And they're going to screen three films from our catalog. In fact, the opening film is The Village House by Achal Mishra. His second feature, Dewey, and then Pushpendra Singh's The Shepherdess and the Seven Songs. We haven't given up on the idea of eventually releasing those on Blu-ray and physical media. We're hoping that there will be enough of a groundswell and people who discover how great these films are that we could put them out on Blu-ray and they would sell well enough to justify the cost. Because you have to have enough people who are interested in that particular title and owning it on physical media, because otherwise, if only 50 or 100 or 150 people buy that Blu-ray, then you've lost quite a bit of money.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So we're very fortunate that so far with all of our releases, they've done quite well, and both Ilya Muromets and Sampo sold out on the limited.
I really hope this series at MoMA sheds a spotlight on Indian independent cinema, or just South Asian cinema, because it helps us because we've been trying to shine the spotlight on it ourselves. But MoMA might have a bit bigger reach than we do. So because these films are amazing, they're just amazing. The hard part is getting people to know that they exist, because they're absolutely amazing films.
Have you both seen RRR, which is on Netflix?
Yes, it's fantastic.
It's just utterly insane and wonderful. Chris, have you seen it?
That movie's like Yeah, that movie's like 3 hours long. I watched it on July 4th. I came home and got my girlfriend and said, we need to watch this again because she hadn't seen it yet. And I was like, I'll spend 6 hours watching this movie today.
Yeah, no, it is pretty amazing. And I have to say, it's been one of the most, it was a huge hit over in India, and now it's broken out here in a way that I can't remember any recent Indian films having broken out. And it's fantastic.
I can't remember what the outlet was, but I was very happy to see that because that was so popular, someone put out a list of like, not, there's amazing Indian cinema
Yeah.
that's nothing like that film. Here's 10 you should see. And I think I think Shepherdess and or Village House were on that list.
Oh,
So yeah, hopefully like people will realize, because we discussed this when we formed the company, that we wanted to shine a spotlight on independent Indian cinema. It was a passion of Dennis's. But we knew it was not going to be easy because there's a preconceived idea in America of what an Indian film is.
right.
And it's not art house independent cinema. It's big, bombastic musical numbers and crazy action films. And we're like, yeah, they have those, but they've got this other whole, beautiful, art house cinema as well. Like, you should give it a shot. It's really worth your time.
There's an organization here in Austin that if y'all are interested, I might connect you to. They've had a similar mission for at least 10 years now. So they do film festivals here in Austin that are around independent produced Indian films that are produced outside of the Bollywood system. And I know some of the creators of that festival. I might be able to connect y'all if you don't already know them.
Oh, we may have been in touch already. I mean, there are wonderful Indian film festivals in almost all of the sort of, major urban centers in the US that are making a lot of these non-mainstream films and pieces available, and in some cases able to bring in the filmmakers. And so we played a number of our films with them, and they're really wonderful in showing people that there is a huge range of Indian cinema. I mean, one of my dream projects, if I had unlimited funds, would be to restore a number of the classic Bollywood films from the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And we've tried, and it's really, really difficult, not only finding the rights, but elements. And there are some people overseas in India who have really been ringing the alarm bells for years, decades now, about preservation issues over there. But it's really, really difficult. We have not given up hope, but this is a really long game we're playing in terms of trying to restore and re-release some of these amazing Indian films from the 50s and 60s.
There's is it Saul Khan? There's a guy from Raj Kapoor. I'm sorry, Raj Kapoor. Some of his movies. I don't know if that's who you're thinking about, but some of these ones were massive hits back in the kind of 50s, right? And then they're not really spoken about as much anymore. But they, I just
Dev Anand just passed away recently, a few months ago, and he was one of the best known stars of the classic era of Bollywood filmmaking.
Okay.
Starting in the late 50s and 60s. There are just so many amazing films and filmmakers from that period. Again, we're very fortunate that we're able to bring some of the new independent Indian films, and these are, that I have to say, that is one of the good things about releasing new and contemporary films, is you generally don't have to spend 5 years looking for elements or many months restoring the films. The producers will have a beautiful 4K ProRes and the audio elements and subtitles and all those things, because they want the film to get out there and be seen, and because they've usually dealt with festivals that require all those elements as well. So in terms of getting the deliverables, it's so much easier dealing with a contemporary film than it is trying to restore and re-release a film that has not been available for 30, 40, 50 years or more. So
I imagine that distribution and just actually getting these films in the hands of people is a big part of that. Is that part of the reason why you decided to kind of join with OCN? Was it just they have that kind of distribution engine that's cranking along, and you know, the marketing tools behind it? Was that a big reason for that?
Yeah,
Craig,
there's
do you
a combination of things is putting out a Blu-ray. There's a lot of upfront costs, and they can handle that because they're at scale better than we could on our own. We're also, you know, a lot of especially the restoration releases are, a lot of our stuff is kind of genre or genre adjacent, and they have a built-in audience that's craving that already. So it just kind of made sense. Is they ease the entry into Blu-ray releasing, and they have, you know, a rabid fan base that's wants the product that we're putting out. So it was kind of somewhat of a no-brainer.
And has it generally been a good partnership? I mean, a lot of your stuff is selling out, so I imagine so.
So far, so good. Yeah.
That's good.
I have to apologize. I just double checked. The Indian actor I meant to reference was Dilip Kumar, who was one of the great stars. Devon Ond was also one of the amazing stars who later, he was a filmmaker as well. But Dilip Kumar passed away about a year ago. He was one of the greatest performers of that classic age of Bollywood cinema. So
okay, no problem. Well, look, I wanted people to hear y'all's passion and hear from you yourselves. I know it's natural, so I know all I had to do was turn the cameras on or the mics on, I guess I should say, since it's not a video podcast, but and just get y'all talking. I know, Craig, you mentioned that, you know, I think we're close to when you have to go. So are there any other questions, Zach, you have? I mean, this time has been amazing for me, as always. The passion came through. I love the fact that people get to hear this and get to hear, you know, what y'all are trying to accomplish. Zach, anything else from you?
No, just thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to come back and discuss this stuff. It's been a blast.
I hope you keep enjoying the Blu-ray releases, you know, and I would like to give a shout out to Justin Liberty, who's our partner in crime at OCN Vinegar Syndrome. He has been a really great collaborator, as well as Anu Rangachar with Gratitude Films, who we've released all of our Indian and Southeast Asian content with, and then Oliver Lotsky and her colleague Victoria Belopolsky at Seagull Films, that we've collaborated on the release of Ilya Muromets and Sampo, and we'll be working with on several upcoming releases as well. So while it looks like it's just the two of us, in fact, there's a lot of other people who contribute. Tony Stella did the fabulous artwork for Shandigor, the Sharam Mokri set, Ilya Muromets, and Sampo, that is just breathtakingly beautiful. So there's so many people. Tyler Fagerstrom, who was our colorist, who's now working on Solomon King, that contribute to these. And then most of all, it's the filmmakers. I mean, we're here just to shine a light on the work that these filmmakers had done. We are not, you know, the creative engine behind these. These were, you know, these are beautiful films that for a multitude of reasons may have gone unseen. We're just trying to bring them back to a form closest to what we hope the filmmaker would have wanted, and make them available to a wider audience. Patushko isn't here, but I'm hoping that he would be happy with the Blu-ray releases of Ilya Muromets and Sampo.
To some degree, this is a selfish endeavor. It's these films we like that we want to see looking as good as possible, because personally we want to go into a theater and see them, And then I want to be able to just go in my closet here and pull down the disc and watch it whenever I want.
Right.
And so if we don't do it, we can't do that.
That's, 20 years ago, I organized a touring retrospective of Alexander Patushko's films with my friend and our colleague Oliver Lotsky at Seagull Films in New York. And the two titles we were not able to include for technical reasons were Ilya Muromets and Sampo.
Ah.
And so that little list in the back of my mind, I was always like, gee, I gotta close that circle someday. And we're hoping, we are making plans, can't announce anything yet, but to have more Patushko gems coming out through Deaf Crocodile in the future. I
mean, I almost just want to end there. I just have to say, for anybody that doesn't know and hasn't seen these films yet, I hope you're okay with me saying this, but if you think about what Ray Harryhausen was doing when he was in the prime of his career, it's very analogous to what Patushko's doing, although I think Patushko might even be more creative with staging and framing and perspective, almost like using the perspective that you can do with film to create some size differences and stuff, because it's just, I was blown away by the effects that were inside Ilya Muromets and what he was able to do on a fully, no CGI, right? So it's all practical effects.
That is very kind. I have to say, I knew Ray Harryhausen. I got the wonderful opportunity to interview him a number of times, and he was one of the sweetest, most wonderful filmmakers I've ever seen. I think he actually should have taken a co-directing credit on most of the films, or in fact, all of the films that he worked on, because he essentially created, directed all of the stop motion, all of those incredible sequences for the films. He took the visual effects, and I think he may have had a producing credit on some of the later ones. When I watch those films, I really consider Harryhausen to be the at the very least the co-creator, if not in some cases the main creative force. So I dearly love Ray. I love the work of Patushko, Mario Bava. I think they were all coming from that same wellspring of sort of wonderful fantasy and visual effects filmmaking.
Awesome. What a great note to end it on. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank
and what is the Neil Simon song you quoted early on?
Same time next year.
I hope that's true. Well, all right. Thanks very much, Al.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.